and gentlemen, good morning. Great to see such a wonderful audience here for our discussion about audience expectations. It's a session that has a great deal of meaning for me personally, and then I think for our field. I am an enormous fan of the research that comes out of the National Endowment for the Arts, and it was a couple of years ago that the General Social Survey that was issued, I think it was 2015, that was so revelatory in terms of what the motivators are for attendance at symphony, opera, and ballet performances. And the number one motivator in the GSS was revealed to be to socialize with friends and family. The largest competition for the attention of our ticket buyers is food and beverage events, going out to restaurants. So we're dealing in a world where we're not competing with the local symphony or theater company, but we're competing with local restaurants. Church, they bring in opera singers. So everyone is dealing with this. We ourselves have engaged discussions about whether food and beverage should be allowed in the auditorium during performances, and we could have a huge debate in this room about the advisability of that and all the strategies. So this session is designed to learn more about what audiences are expecting, what they're looking for. How can our attention to the audience experience increase the frequency with which people come to see the opera? So I'm going to go through some slides in just a moment, but in the interest of thinking about audience experience, Tim O'Leary has asked me to make sure that everyone coming this evening to the host company reception understands that the hors d'oeuvres that will be available will be sufficient for dinner. However, if you're part of the running group and have earned the right to consume even more calories, there will be additional sandwiches at the tent that are available for all of you. Nonetheless, you always have to think about the audience experience, so that on behalf of Opera Theater of St. Louis. So we had invited colleagues from La Placa Cohen to come and talk about their Culture Track 2017 report. They weren't able to be here, so I'm going to take you through some of the slides that I found to be particularly interesting in the Culture Track 2017 study. And then I'll be followed by colleagues with their research findings, and then we'll talk about what can we learn from it and what can we do about all of this. So, meeting audience expectations, La Placa Cohen. I have the clicker here, so let me do this. Again, Culture Track 2017, and you can find it on the website. You can Google this and read the report. The report talks about the new cultural consumer. And they ask the questions that we're asking here today. What is the mindset of this new cultural consumer? Why do they engage with culture in the first place? And what causes them to stay away, which is an important thing that we have to think about. They noted the greatest single motivator, having fun. Having fun. And again, all of us do take our opera so seriously, and we think about producing rarely performed bel canto operas and iconic American operas when much of our audience is coming to have fun. And yet, what they found was that there is no one prevailing, one defining attitude, that lots of audience members come to the experience displaying what would seem to be countervailing attitudes about the experience. Audiences seek out culture as a critical element of their personal development and exposure to new ideas. This desire for self-improvement is consistent across generations. One of the most surprising findings in the report is that audiences of all ages are also choosing culture as a major form of releasing stress. We have to think about how our opera performances contribute to or exacerbate the situation. When it comes to understanding why culture can drive audiences away, personal relevance is critical. Personal relevance. And again, that's a thread through all of our work at this conference about the works we're producing and how they relate to current events, civic priorities, and the audiences we seek to serve. They cited barriers to cultural participation, and none of these is unfamiliar to us. It's not for someone like me. And with the prevailing stereotype about opera, there must be many people who think that opera isn't for them because of some of the behavioral or sartorial expectations. I didn't think of it. It's inconvenient. These days, with so much great art available at home on a big screen, going out to a theater, finding parking, getting there in time after a busy day at work, finding time to eat before you get there, it's not convenient. I couldn't find anyone to go with. It's one we've heard a lot before. Its value is not worth the cost, the ROI. And lest we always say, well, if you have Adele at Madison Square Garden, people are paying hundreds of dollars. Well, they know who Adele is. When they look at the cast of your opera, they probably don't recognize the names. They may not be able to pronounce the name of the opera. And that makes the ticket price feel a lot more expensive because they really don't know what they're getting. Diversity means representation. People of color are 82% more likely to stay away because activities don't reflect people of a range of backgrounds. And although they're not on the panel today, Opera Theater of St. Louis has done some interesting research about that. You should speak with them about the degree to which people of all backgrounds, people of all races and ethnicities these days expect to see diversity. And if you watch television and keep track of the number of ads these days where multiracial families are abundant on the TV screen, the world expects to see diversity they may not see when they get to the opera house. Of course, the first step is getting audiences in the door, but what do they want from cultural experiences once they arrive? Audiences have different needs and wants at different times, or even simultaneously, as if there were a simple answer to this question. There isn't. But LaPlaca-Cohen tracked the characteristics of an ideal cultural activity, and in decreasing order, that they are social, interactive, lively, hands-on, active, calm, immersive, and reflective. And within that cluster, where does opera fall? Social, interactive, lively, hands-on, active, calm, not necessarily, immersive, certainly can be, reflective, we hope, but there are a lot of these qualities that we don't exhibit. They distinguish between 2014, where cultural omnivores, instead of focusing on one type of activity, culture goers were sampling various forms. They contrasted that with 2017, where the experience omnivores, audiences now hunger for and expect experiences that suit their every need and mood. Experience omnivores. Now, there are some slides here that talk about the contrasting expectations, even in the same individuals. To go it alone or not, audiences want both. An average of 78% of those motivated to go alone also want to interact with others. They want it both ways. Culture connects us to reality and lets us escape it. Over 80% of those who participate to connect to their community also want to be transported. Cultural diehards also want something new and different. I found this slide to be really interesting. Frequent attendees are 94% more likely to stay away if the experience is seen as unchanging. Now, keep in mind that our productions, one after another, they're in the same venue, same place. That doesn't change. And I sometimes think that we perceive a much greater difference between a Puccini opera and a Rossini opera than our audiences do. We were talking about this yesterday. At the end of Lucia, at the end of La Bohème, the soprano is still dead. So that even though we see a much more subtle distinction across our repertoire, does our audience feel that same distinction, or does it just feel like the same thing to them, performance after performance? Audiences have a range of perspectives on how digital technology currently enhances or detracts from their experience. Digital appeals to cultural activities, or appeals in cultural activities, more detailed information, the activity is shareable digitally, you can provide a deeper understanding of the content, somehow makes the activity feel new. But they also found a countervailing impression of social media. For others, they say, cultural experiences are more authentic, focused, and engaging without digital. A kind of reliance on feeling more authentic, there's more focus, less complicated, there's better connection to the content if we're experiencing it in analog rather than through digital media. In this chart, they tracked respondents' desire for digital experiences in specific cultural activities. And you'll find opera down in the middle of this group, that people seem in museums to want more digital information, as you see so many museums now do, with all kinds of access to information as you're going through the museum. Opera's in the middle of this group, what people hope to gain from it through digital media lies in identifying how it can deepen the cultural experience in ways nothing else can. Referring to digital media, does it enrich or distract? Will it simplify the experience or add unnecessary complexity? Does it feel authentic? Social media can help us broaden our impact. And this is something that L. Michelle Smith said at our conference last year. People of color are 31% more likely to say integrating social media would enhance the experience. The study also talked about loyalty. Since 2011, there's been a flat or downward trend in memberships and subscriptions, a cultural promiscuity phenomenon that continues in 2017. But they hasten to say that this doesn't mean that people aren't loyal. And they talked about all the other ways that we display loyalty to restaurants or bars, our favorites, to retail stores, that's the store where we get our clothes or shoes, loyalty to sports teams, TV networks or websites, schools or universities, loyalty to political parties, cultural organizations, down a little bit further on this list, loyalty to airlines, to gyms, that people still are loyal. They still do repeat attendance at places that matter to them. Outside of culture, audiences view loyalty as a personal relationship. Their ideal partner is trustworthy, consistent, kind. Importantly, audiences value not only how cultural organizations treat them, but also how these organizations impact the rest of the world. And in this study, LaPlaca Cohen introduced to me the concept of a social return on investment, SROI. They say this is the tipping point. New models of loyalty must forge meaningful, reciprocal, and long-lasting relationships. And that's, again, so directly tied to our civic practice work and what so many of you are doing in communities. So that is the LaPlaca Cohen study. I present it in their stead, so I'm sure I haven't done it as well as they would have, but I urge you to go online and take a look at the complete report because it is just fascinating. I would now like to introduce Christine Yoon. She's the Senior Program Officer at the Wallace Foundation and can tell us about this tremendous investment that Wallace has made in studying audience behavior. Please welcome Christine.
Good morning, everyone, and if you're from the East Coast like I am, good afternoon. And thank you, Mark, for that introduction. Oh, I need the clicker. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be up here today with our panelists. So I'm Christine Yoon. I'm Senior Officer at the Wallace Foundation. And what I'll do in the next 10 minutes is first give a quick introduction to my organization. I'll give some highlights of what we're learning from the experience of our grant-funded organizations. And I'll wrap it up with some final takeaways since I only have 10 minutes, so I might be rushing through some of this. But quickly, the Wallace Foundation, we're a private foundation. We're based in New York City, but we fund nationally. And our mission is to foster improvements in learning and enrichment for disadvantaged children and to foster the vitality for the arts for everyone. Our approach is to help answer a question that, if solved, could help progress in a field. What this means is we design funding initiatives and support organizations through those initiatives who allow us to study very deeply, as David will tell you, very deeply into what they're doing and why, so that we can learn from them and then share those learnings to the broader field, thereby helping organizations beyond those that we could fund directly. Specifically in the arts, we focus on, one area of focus is on building audiences, and today I'll be speaking from the experience of two of our funding initiatives. The first is the Wallace Excellence Awards, which ran from 2006 to 2014, and the organizations that participated in this initiative did see audience gains. And the second initiative is the one that we're currently in, Building Audiences for Sustainability. We are funding 25 performing arts organizations across the US. And again, that's the one that we're in right now, so those learnings are developing. And I'll speak from these three studies in particular. There is a lot more available online on our website, including the full studies if you're interested. And I think actually some of these publications are available that you can take for free. Neil asked if he had to buy it. They're free. Okay, so let's come back to this question. I would start from this publication, The Road to Results. What this publication is we looked at the 9 practices that the organizations that were most successful in the Wallace Excellence Award, they consistently shared these 9 practices summed in this infographic. And now that it's up here, I realize it's a little blurry, but this first practice is recognize when change is needed. So I would recommend a good place to start is to ask your organization, why are you interested in building audiences or building particular audiences right now? And this is not to mean, of course, that you haven't thought about audience building before, but really, what is the problem that your organization is facing in this regard right now? While this publication was written from the experience of Wallace Excellence Awards, it still holds true today in what we're seeing in building audiences. So in the Building Audiences initiative, we asked organizations to develop a theory of change. And here I pause because I know that feeling when a funder asks you to put together your theory of change. Funders love these things. But I would say, actually, we didn't introduce the theory of change and logic model until halfway in our initiative because we did find it's incredibly difficult to put down, to have your organization around a very clear, simple statement on what you want to try to solve, what it would look like if you solved it, and how do you think you might get there? What are the assumptions in there? So I would like to give an example, a quick example. There's a dance organization in our cohort. They really wanted to focus on millennial audiences because they said this is the audience for the future. They successfully attracted a large portion of their audiences to be of that millennial generation. But then once they got there, they found millennials buy cheaper tickets, they buy those tickets less frequently, and they are far less likely to donate, which is different from when they do. Sorry, there's an alarm going off. When they do donate, are we okay? Okay. Sorry, when they do donate, they can give in as large amounts as other generations, but they are far less likely to donate. So what this meant for that dance organization is to really examine Why is millennial audience important for them, especially if there's a risk in their short-term immediate finances? And for that organization, their gamble is they believe that their donors will offset some of those short-term losses, because this is important for donors as well, to see that their audiences are diverse and are younger. Okay. So then coming back to this question, how else can we find more about who our audiences are? What is it that you want? What is it that they want? I would recommend, from the experience of building audiences, to start with a database analysis. It really helps to have a solid understanding of who your audience is in terms of demographics and what their behaviors are. And this is actually harder to figure out than it looks. I think David from Opera Phil can tell you. When Opera Phil took a look at their audiences, they were seeing they were attracting more new households. But then upon doing a database analysis, one of the things that they saw were there were deeper levels, deeper things going on with churn that they really needed to address as well. Just to save some time on speaking, I also put on there, to see if this is something that's helpful for your organization, I put what the average costs are and the range of costs that we've seen in database analysis for our grantees. It also helps, once you've identified who you want to attract, to do some qualitative research to figure out and to better understand what are those attitudes that people are holding. And I think the stuff that LaPlaca Cohen just had in their culture track is very relevant here. But you can get deeper with understanding this with in your own context, in your own environment. And what that qualitative research will tell you, whether you do focus groups or surveys, they'll tell you the range of attitudes that people hold, but they won't tell you the scale of those attitudes, which you can really only find out by doing some quantitative research as well. Okay. Market research, of course, is expensive, can be expensive, and this is probably one of the hardest things to find funding for. We recognize that, which is why we've published this publication as well. This is one of those things that are available out there. This is a practical guide to doing market research, either how to do it well if it's the first time that you're embarking on it, or what are some cheaper or lower cost, even free opportunities that are available. So for instance, a really important, valuable kind of market research is to also track how you're doing as you're going along. Are you, the bets that you made on your audience, the bets that you made if you provide the food and drinks beforehand, are they working out? And one way to know if you're on the right track is through post-performance surveys tied to your ticketing database, so that you can connect when people said, yes, I had a great experience, do they follow that up with actually coming back in the future? And those are cheap to do. It's just a couple $1,000s. So I'd like to share what are some of those common barriers or motivators that we found in the market research of our own grantees. And there were some pretty consistent themes. I'm going to pull the themes from half the organizations currently in building audiences are studying millennials. And the three themes that I chose today to discuss with you guys are the themes that were consistent across our organizations, whether they're going for millennials or audiences of other generations. So the first was about familiarity. Across the cohort, potential audiences are asking themselves, if I go to this show or this performance, will I be comfortable? Will I know when to clap? Will I know what to wear? And so we're hearing that people are unfamiliar not just with the art form or with the organization, but again, also with the whole experience of what that's going to be like. I would give an example of a large theater company in Chicago. What they heard is from their audience, that rush to get out of work on time, to make it to the theater, figure out how to pick up dinner on the way there, where to eat, and just planning all those logistics was incredibly stressful and actually was a huge barrier to attending. So for that theater in Chicago, they offered opportunities and options for people, similar to what we found in LaPlaca Cohen, to come early, eat dinner at the theater, and then you can just relax and be ready for the show. And I want to make clear the takeaway here is not provide food and drink and you'll be okay. I just want to make sure that that's not the takeaway that you get from this story. As a funder, I would say the takeaway is to do that theory of change and to see if that activity really does fit in the overall goals that your organization is really trying to achieve. We did have another organization, a presenting organization in the South, who did do the after party, post-performance after party. They had food trucks. I went to see it. It was fantastic. They had a huge amount of people come. The energy in that room and the diversity in the room was amazing, but the people who came to that after party were not necessarily buying more tickets because they came. and they were not necessarily more inclined to try that organization the first time because the after party was offered, basically to mean that after party was incredibly staff intensive to do, it was a little bit expensive to do, and the organization saw no gains from providing it. So the next concept that keeps coming up across all these market research studies is about awareness. We have a number of organizations that are really trying to go after a different demographic than what they've traditionally seen in their audiences. And there was an assumption that perhaps my organization feels unwelcoming to certain ethnicities, certain races, certain generations. So they wanted to do market research to figure out how can I have a perception of being more welcoming to this population. And what they found out was people in that target audience actually didn't know that the organization existed, or they didn't know what that organization offered. It wasn't about not feeling welcome. It was when you have a crush on someone and you find out they actually don't know you exist. It was very hard for them to accept. And this was a very good question. One of the organizations asked, is this another way, I didn't know you existed, is that another way of actually saying, I don't feel welcome, but I don't feel comfortable speaking that up in a focus group? And we did a lot of secondary research to really confirm truly people didn't know this organization existed and that they offered performing arts within its walls. This slide. So, of course, competition is also a huge factor in this. We've heard this from LaPlaca Cohen. I'd say the same large theater company in Chicago that I talked about, people actually did know that theater company existed. They did know about its plays and shows. They really enjoyed those performances. But when they thought about, what do I want to do this weekend? I want to plan something fun for Saturday night. Going to that theater, going to that play was never top of mind. And that was really because of increased competition, and whether organizations were going for millennials, going for people of color, and any kind of target audience, almost all our organizations are seeing, excuse me, a major barrier is people consider going out to eat as a cultural activity. Okay, and then the last theme is about relevance. People want to know, is this performance, or is this going to this organization, is it for someone like me? We have a presenting organization who found out from their market research that actually the ideal target audience for them is people who consider themselves to have an adventurous mindset. And once they started focusing on, for this organization, once they started focusing on that adventurous mindset, they actually saw huge increases in their audience. This is a slide from our millennial study. Of the 25 organizations in building audiences, again, half are focusing on younger generations. When we aggregated all those individual market research reports they did, we found that for millennials, there's common reasons why people want to attend, and it really comes to relevance, it comes to ideas that they have about their self-identity. So I would emphasize there is no right answer, there's no right activity. It is not necessarily food trucks for everyone. And what we've been doing a lot in our current initiative, Building Audiences, is to provide various kinds of frameworks and tools as a way of thinking about, so how will you know what is right for your organization? All our organization, for example, are going through continuous learning, which is really a fancier, more drawn-out way of saying you have to test and learn. We talk about the customer experience, not just customer service, human-centered design. All of these are along the same veins of, these are ways of thinking about it, ways of doing testing and learning, and as part of testing and learning, getting information along the way. And Opera America asked me to talk about the 5 E's. For those, I think David might have talked about this in an earlier session. The 5 E's is a principle that comes out of human-centered design. But again, these are all in similar flavors. The 5 E's is really a way of thinking about the overall experience and not just customer service. So some final takeaways. I think first and foremost, most important for your organization as a whole, to really think about what is the problem that you're trying to solve. What would it look like if you solved it? Number 2, market research can definitely help in understanding where you are today and understanding, based on where you want to go, what are some of those assumptions that people are holding that you may not be aware of. And then number 3, again, there is no right answer to all of this. What works for Opera Phil isn't going to be what works for you. This is going to be a process of testing and learning. And finally, as we learn more, including in our current initiative, Building Audiences for Sustainability, we publish everything that we learn from the insights of our organizations, and that's our website to find out more.
Thank you so much. I don't know, is my lab working? Can you? Christine, thank you very much, and really appreciate that, and find it interesting how resonant it is with the other research. At the podium now is a great colleague. He's been at the National Endowment for the Arts for many, many years, and I love meeting with him when I'm down in Washington because the research he conducts out of his department is so informative. Sunil Iyengar is the Director, Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I want to thank the staff for Opera America and Mark, who's not only a friend to data, but a friend to knowledge, as is evidenced most recently by the, the National Endowment for the Arts is very proud to fund this Our Town knowledge building grant to promote the civic practice work, which I want to thank Mark for coming down to the National Endowment for the Arts and speaking to our National Council about. It was really an exciting session. So, great to be here. I will just be showing you today, just if you don't know that there is in fact an Office of Research and Analysis within the National Endowment for the Arts. I'm proof of it, I guess. And we basically, our goal is to expand public knowledge about the value and impact of the arts through research. And we generally apply social sciences, behavioral research to accomplish this mission. I'm going to be touching on 3 fairly disparate data sources or initiatives to discuss, really pluck the highlights that I think this group would be most interested in pertaining to opera or the performing arts more generally, where I can't get to opera specifically. And I won't spend too much time on each of these, but to point out that we work with a lot of other federal agencies and organizations to conduct this research. The first 2, for example, are large-scale surveys we do. And the third is some work we do with the Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, getting in a little bit into the economics data, which sheds a really interesting light on attendance patterns having to do with opera and the performing arts. And then as a sort of bonus, and I'll do this all within 10 or 15 minutes, is to just talk about an initiative that I think many of you may not know of, but has, I think, some deep implications for opera and programming in the future. So, the survey of public participation in the arts research is probably one of the longest running initiatives that the National Endowment for the Arts does in research. It's basically what happens is a large-scale survey we do with the U.S. Census Bureau, and we ask about how Americans from a variety of backgrounds, it's nationally representative, of course, participate in the arts of various kinds, and how often they participate, and a whole range of other demographic and behavioral variables. But this is interesting because this report up here is actually having to do with the 2002 through 2012 data. And I'm sorry to say that I don't have the report for the 2017 research. Like La Placa Cohen, we go through a slightly different process for releasing the data. It goes through a big chain at the U.S. Census Bureau and then at our own agency. But we did do some analysis already. So I think for the first time, you'll be seeing some highlights of the 2017 opera data. And there's much more to follow later this year. So with that, I guess if I had to point to one statistic that's maybe most directly relevant to this group, it would be, of course, the percentage that we find nationally who reported having attended at least one opera performance in the last year. And this is, again, coming from 2017. But if you look there, and I apologize if some of the numbers are too small to read, in 2002 you had about 3% of the population, adult population, who reported having gone to an opera. It went down in 2008, and we tend to believe this was true of a lot of different art forms, so we believe this has a lot to do with the time period. It was in the middle of the recession, and of course people's discretionary spending habits were curbed as well. So you saw 2.1%. Kind of held flat though till 2012. 2017 it went up numerically a little bit. I have to caution, being the research person I am here, that it was not a statistically significant increase. Therefore, but however, what you're going to hear from me is that's not a bad thing, and particularly in the next slide. You have reason to believe that actually opera is doing pretty well. This is not the box office numbers. This is not like how many times people went to opera. We do have data on that, which we'll be sharing in the fall as well. But just to know that there's been a stability here that you can see from 2008. And I know it sounds like a positive wrinkle, but in fact, and I'm sort of like on the cusp, I want to tell you more that I can, that we're seeing from the data, but I was told to stick to the opera part because there's some really interesting stuff having to do with the performing arts in general that I think you'll be interested in the fall without being too cryptic. And I might allude to that in a moment. So the demographics here, what you see here, and again, the slides may be hard to see for people in the back, but the overall rate, if you look at that 2.2%, by the way, that's about 5.3 million adults. If you look at the these different demographic characteristics, the ones with highlights on them are the percentages that actually are greater than the national share. So more women at a higher rate, went to opera. Maybe that's not surprising to some people. Whites, but also Asian Americans. Actually, of all the groups, they have the highest rate, racial ethnic groups, having gone to opera in the last year. You see different age groups represented, older adults, of course, and you see bachelor, people with higher education, if you will, having the higher rates in terms of attendance. But what I wanted to point to here is there was a statistically significant finding, and it was that this 35 to 44 group, a group that I might add, when we last did the survey and the last few times had the lowest rates, among the lowest rates of attendance, are actually now, that was an increase. This 2.7, which is above the national rate of 2.2, is coming from 35 to 44-year-olds. So what does that mean? Well, maybe one of the things it does is it gives me hope because it suggests that even though we were seeing low rates in the 18 to 24-year-olds when that cohort was that age, they now seem to be going at a higher rate to opera. And yet we were also thinking, oh, this is a time when people will be having kids, they're going to be busy in other ways in the middle of their careers. Are they going to make time to do these kinds of things? Well, somehow 35 to 44-year-olds have managed to do that. And so that's kind of, that needs more, we need to do more analysis, but that was something that was to me a silver lining in the flat rate. That said, again, I do think I use the term stability rather than flat because this does suggest that, amid diverse leisure options and, even other ways of participating in the arts, nevertheless, the rates have held steady in terms of attendance for opera. One quick thing, I was being a little cryptic a moment ago, but one thing you will see is that informal arts, if you will, informal arts venues, you're going to see some interesting rates of arts participation there. And I say that because, again, I was hearkening back to the Our Town Knowledge Building Grant and the work you're doing with civic practices and civic spaces. I think that has a lot to do with where the audiences are going to be and where they're going to go and come from in the future, and that seems to be vital work, at least looking at the data as a whole from the SPPA for 2017. So venues, of course, as you'll hear in a moment, again, underscored by some other data, are increasingly important in terms of choice of venue. So I'm going to move quickly to another survey. As you've already kind of given some highlights, Mark, but just to know that the General Social Survey is a survey done out of the University of Chicago, the National Opinion Research Center. And although this is a 2012 survey, I will say that we are now analyzing data from the next wave of that where we added similar questions about the arts. And so this is a report that's online. All of our stuff's free, of course, too, called When Going Gets Tough, Barriers and Motivations Affecting Arts Attendance. So just in a nutshell, the rates, absolute rates of people attending stuff is roughly the same as what we found in the SPPA historically. This is actually those who either went to a live performing arts event or to a visual arts event, and then we break it down into those two groups. We weren't able to get down to slice it further to opera specifically, but we're hopeful this will be illuminating too. So the top motivations, as I think was mentioned by Mark, 73% of all people who went to something in the last year said that if it was a visual arts or performing arts event, socializing was the big reason. And in fact, if you go further and look at just performing arts, it was a much greater factor, socialization with family or friends. Also seeing the performance or exhibit at a particular location was really interesting to see that. While that rate was mostly true for people attending visual arts events, so you can imagine them going to a museum or a gallery where going to a place is all the rage, if you will. Performing arts too, you saw that. And so again, being venue conscious is obviously an important piece. And gaining knowledge or learning something new, which was attested earlier, is something people seem to be interested in. So this is kind of hard to read really quickly, so I'll just point out to the last two bars. If you were able to look at the last two pairs of columns, what we're seeing here are the rates of people who reported having gone to something in the last year. They were then asked to talk about why did you do this? And the point here is to show that the pale bars represent those people who attended performing arts versus museums or art museums, or we're focusing on the performing arts here. And we're seeing that those clearly outrank the percentages for the visual arts when it comes to seeing a specific artist or performer. That was more true of people attending performing arts than it was to, say, go see a Degas exhibit or something like that, to see a specific art exhibit. It was also true about socialization, as I said. That was a much bigger motivator in terms of share of adults who reported wanting to do that versus people who wanted to go to an art museum. But the real reason we want to do this study, oh, and just quickly here, you don't have to belabor this, but this again shows that socialization with family or friends, by far the largest share of people wanting that out of going to an arts event were those who attended performing arts versus visual arts. So, but the real reason we did this also is to get at those who didn't go, because we don't really know much about that group, do we? I mean, we always talk about what the motivations are, but what about the barriers? So we found that there's actually 13% of the US adult population, about 31 million adults, who said they would have liked to go to something specific in the last year, either a visual arts event or a performing arts event, but for some reason did not. So we asked why not, and we tried to drill it out in terms of performing arts and visual arts. So the top motivators, and I'll just say, I told my office, look, I can just write this on the back of an envelope. Do we really need to do the survey? I was being a little cynical. It was a bad day, I think. But I just said, it's going to be time and money, right? Well, in fact, yes, but there's a wrinkle to this. So could not find the time, including due to work. 47% said that was the reason they didn't go to something. But if you drill down further, it's largely, it was young parents and parents of young children, that is kids were 6 or younger. And so again, this gets to what we already know, and it's getting reaffirmed through other data, is that the need for family-friendly programming, family-friendly venues, or thinking about how that plays into this, festivals. And those are things which we'll be drilling into in this 2017 data, and you'll see over the fall. Cost too much was a big issue, and maybe that has to do with not perceiving the value proposition and knowing the artist, familiarity. Difficulty getting there, including difficulty getting to a particular venue, and that may have to do with accessibility, sheer accessibility. So maybe I'm harping a lot on venue, partly because my coming here to this particular hotel is resonant. It was in this hotel about 15 years ago that my parents held a wedding reception for me, and it may have even been in this room, but all the rooms look alike, so I'm not sure. But anyway, Tim, that's nothing against Four Seasons. So percent who were interested in or did not. Okay, so then when we look at these barriers, why people didn't go to things, lack of time we've already established, too difficult to get there, costing too much, and you can see which ones pop out for performing arts versus attending. And the performing arts people who didn't go, the would-be performing arts attenders are claiming that it costs too much more than say the visual arts people. And we know a lot of museums sometimes have free services, that sort of thing. Okay, not wanting to visit that particular location also was a big deal for performing arts. Okay, so now this is the last slide on this part, and I just want to point out here that since you talked about loyalty, if you look at the left, we just asked about the survey. General social survey is basically a major sociological survey, so it asks about a lot of things, some of which has nothing to do with the arts. But it does give us the ability to take that data and then see to what extent do those responses predict people's likelihood to attend stuff. And we found actually that devotion and loyalty as a value statement, among many other value statements, was the biggest predictor of whether someone was likely to actually have reported going to an arts event. So that's pretty interesting, loyalty. And that was across demographic groups for the most part. So, we'll have to look at see whether millennials also register that. But in general, it was perceived to be important loyalty. So lastly, or almost next to lastly, just to say, in our economic research with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, we know that about $750 billion is generated by the arts industries as a whole. That's new value added to the U.S. economy. And what does that have to do with opera and largely the performing arts? Well, we do know for performing arts, it's about close to $40 billion. Among nonprofits alone, we did some calculations with the blessings of the BEA because they weren't able to give us the opera numbers, but we did our own calculations and we turned it around and they said, yes, that's right. It's about 576 million. And we know that performing arts presenters are one of the fastest growing arts and cultural industries, about 10%, 9.5% growth over the last 3 years. When the most recent data we have is 2015. But this is interesting. Consumers spend about $31.6 billion on performing arts admissions. And of that, opera and musical theater accounted for about $3.5 billion. If you look at this chart, it shows you that, in fact, consumer spending has been going up in terms of performing arts admissions. So, you have to kind of reconcile this in your head, and it's hard to because you'll see one thing from our other data, and you'll see, well, consumer spending is going up. Well, we're talking with a national survey about the general adult population. This is about the people who basically went to these opera not just opera, of course, a lot of other performing arts experiences. And what I would say here, though, is that when you look at this number here, you find that that opera, clearly is contributing to this, but that also you can compare this when we ultimately release our data on the Survey of Political Research in the Arts. It will include the number of times people went to opera performances, and that's maybe a way of getting at how how frequently they went. And I mean, sort of like looking at box office. So the last thing I just want to say, and it may seem like now for something completely different, but this is actually, I think, kind of important to this group because one of your own, of course, Renee Fleming, has been in talks and achieving quite some remarkable things with the head of the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins. And I want to thank Ann Meyer-Baker here and others for helping us with this. But this is an initiative called Sound Health. And the idea here is to understand how music works in the brain and how that can be then leveraged to understand more about healing and about childhood development and education. And why is this important? It's because there's a lot of publicity and attention that's being brought to bear on music now in terms of science and understanding the science of music and how music speaks to a broader range of human development, and that there's more legitimate reasons through research to promote that. And she's just been a great ambassador for this program, Renee, and very inspiring. I just want to point out there's just a few initiatives we've done, and in September 7th and 8th there will be a convening at the Kennedy Center with, actually it's a concert with in addition to programming and lectures around this concept of music in the brain and the neuroscience of singing and music in general. And it's gotten quite a bit of press, but more importantly to me as a researcher, it's gotten in a lot of peer-reviewed research literature. And it's really rare to have a soprano be the author, co-author of an article that appears in the journal Neuron, but that's what she managed to accomplish. So I would encourage you to stay tuned to this, because I think one of the things that we got out of this, there was a big event last summer that was held, or last fall that was held at the I think it was the summer, sorry, at the Kennedy Center, and there was a real understanding that science can be used to drive arts engagement, and vice versa. Arts engagement can introduce new ways of engaging with science and learning about science. So I wouldn't lose your science brethren in this, in this cause, and try to think about the compatibility of arts engagement there too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sunil, for that really interesting presentation, and we will look forward to the full reports, especially to see whether opera's stability is in contrast to some of the other performing arts, but I know we can't pry that out of you yet this morning. Tim Powers is the Director of Sales and Marketing at the Four Seasons Hotel in St. Louis, a a company that is renowned for its understanding customer needs and responding to them brilliantly. We're so happy, Tim, that you're here with us to talk about the audience experience from your point of view.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the invitation as well. And I wanted to make a confession. I'm not really human, no. No, I wanted to make a confession. I am probably one of the audience that are your audience members that you're trying to attract. I'm self-admitted. I was a sports guy growing up. I'm 44 years old, and I think I've been at the opera once. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm becoming a new fan just by being involved in this. And it's interesting just hearing everybody talk, because my daughter is now 10, and she is taking up the violin, and I can already see why and how important the arts are. So I think just if there's anything that you can take away from me today, it's maybe just looking at things a little bit differently. And as Mark said, you know, I was lucky enough to be invited today. I've been with Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts for 20 years, and we've been lucky enough to be able to present what we call a Four Seasons University, because a lot of clients will come to us and say, you know, how do Four Seasons do what you do, and what can we take away from that? And I know a few of you in the audience have actually been through one of the Four Seasons universities, and that's how we ended up here. And if you don't know, as Mark mentioned, Four Seasons as a brand has been involved in the arts. In fact, our founder, Isidore Sharp, is based in Toronto. We actually sponsored the Center for the Performing Arts there in Toronto as well. So, you know, obviously an exciting opportunity. Just by a quick show of hands, who's been to a Four Seasons hotel before? Wow, awesome. So for those that have, you might know that we do things a little bit differently. So we are, we're actually, we have close to 55 years, 56 years in business. We are still owned by, or still the chairman of Isidore Sharp, still runs the company. And at the end of the day, we are Four Seasons. We run small to medium-sized luxury hotels. So you might be wondering, what does that have to do with opera? At the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities in, you know, we're talking about meeting audience expectations. For us, it's meeting guest expectations, right? We call all of you are our guests staying at the hotel. And Mark, I haven't mentioned this to you, but I might issue a challenge to all of us, and I do this with our orientation class with all of our new employees. Not meeting expectation, but how do we exceed expectations, right? And at the end of the day, one of the big things that I share is, what do our guests get to take away from us at the end of the night after they've stayed with us? And usually people say, you know, experiences and memories and things like that, which relate into what you do. But I also say they also take away a big bill, right? Because at the end of the day, we're typically the more expensive hotel in a particular city that you go to. But it's those memories and experiences that make that difference, that really make you stand out from the crowd, that make people want to come back, that get people excited to go. You know, honestly, it's exciting to me sitting here seeing almost 600 people have been to our hotels, because it's you that end up telling your friends about how great of an experience it was. It's your audience telling people like me, you've got to come to the opera, right? And engaging those people. So for us, it's not necessarily how do we go out and attract new customers and meeting those guest expectations. For us, it's really, we turn things internally. So it's all about our employees. And I'll kind of share a few things just about our culture, but as you can see, our goals and beliefs and principles are our guest experience, but it's really around the employee experience that really, at the end of the day, makes a difference and helps us stand out from the crowd. So as you're seeing here, our greatest asset is our people. You know, at the end of the day, anybody can build a nice building tomorrow. You know, for those that might have seen our hotel here in St. Louis, but somebody could build a better venue, more snazzy type of place. But at the end of the day, it's the experience and the people that are our advantage that should be your advantage as well. And they're the ones that are providing those experiences to stand out from the crowd. this is the cool thing. So I'm 20 years with Four Seasons, and we operate off the golden rule, and I know some companies have kind of made that into commercials and different things, but honestly, we operate on that from every decision that we make, how we treat each other, how do we treat our guests. If difficult decisions come up, we go back to the golden rule, right? It makes it as simple as can be. Sometimes we tend to overthink things from a cultural standpoint, and gosh, what do we need to do? And we make a laundry list of things that are going to improve. But at the end of the day, if you operate off of the golden rule, 99.9 times you're going to get it right. So just a few things of how we operate. So the employee experience. So we spend a huge amount of time trying to attract and find the right employees. Typically an employee, there's been some stats out there. I might have to involve Sunil, but we've had some stats that have said it's actually harder to get into a Four Seasons hotel to get a job than it is to get into Harvard. And it sounds funny, but it's true. The amount of people and the amount of time and the level of detail that we go into trying to find the right people, and it's all about finding people with the right attitude. We can teach somebody the job skills, but you can't teach somebody to genuinely smile and want to help people and go out of their way to create a unique experience. At the end of the day, we can teach somebody how to run the front desk or clean a room or whatever it might be, but that's really how we stand out from the crowd. And then once we get them in, we go through an enormous amount of training. We don't put somebody on the floor until they've gone through a huge amount of training, not only from the front first day when they check in, all the way through when they go out to their line staff position, going through. And then obviously there's a huge amount of things that go in beyond it that Michael and I will share a few things for those that might be coming to a session this afternoon with us. So. And then last but not least, we've been lucky enough to actually be on the Fortune list of the best companies to work with. We're one of the few that have actually been on that list since the inception of the rankings. And that really comes from our employees. So again, you're not hearing me talk about working with our guests or our audience a whole lot, because it all starts with the core of our team. And then just a little snippet to one of the things that makes us different. We're in the human business, right? And you guys are as well. Things can and will go wrong, right? Your microphone might go crazy and you become a different person when you first start. But honestly, every day, every day we mess things up, right? So we're one of the top luxury companies in the world, but we mess up things probably at least every hour, right? And it's because we're human beings and we're working with others and things just go wrong. That's okay. So we actually encourage our staff to report what we call glitches. So glitches are something that go wrong. We have a little database that we track what happens, right? And then we can later go back and track how are we fixing those things. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is finding out what went wrong, what happened to that guest, and most importantly, what are we going to do to recover with them? And the reason why I put that on there is our glitches that happen, typically when those happen to our guests, those guests end up being our best customers in the long run, because we get to know them at a different level, right? You think about, somebody's coming to an opera house, they come in for a great performance and they go. Same thing for our hotel, they might come and go, but you don't get as much interaction with them. But if something goes wrong, you sure get to spend a lot of time with them typically, right? I'm sure that happens just like we do. And at the end of the day, it's all about how you and your teams recover. You could actually win not only a new customer, but they're going to go and tell so many of your friends. And it's funny because I've done this, I think, probably 30 different times now, and I've had at least 20 different companies, like CEOs of companies, come up and be a testimonial for us about how we screwed something up. So it's a little embarrassing initially, right? But then they'll come back and talk about how we recovered and what a difference it made and how they've taken that back to their company and been able to share that. So, oops. So the last thing I wanted to share is just we're continuing to evolve as a company. So we don't have, you know, I've heard the word loyalty come up a few times. I don't know if you know this, but we're one of the few, maybe if not the only hotel company that doesn't have a loyalty points program, right? And you can argue if that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but our belief is that our guests want to be recognized. They want personal recognition and they want unique experiences. You know, somebody tomorrow, again, could give them 500 points if I was giving 100, right? So the points part doesn't necessarily drive, in our opinion, that extra volume and loyalty that we see. So our guests, you know, if we recognize them by name, we give them a personal experience and we blow them away, they're able to actually sing our praises more than if we were giving a monetary points loyalty, right? And where we're going with that, this is kind of an insight to Four Seasons evolution. So we, as you saw, we operate on the golden rule, but we really feel like our job is to connect people, right? We connect people to destinations. We connect them to experiences while they're here. We have a lot of characters that work with us. But we also, a lot of our buildings in our cities have unique characters. So how do we foster those connections with them? And then last but not least, craftsmanship. And this is, you know, right in your wheelhouse. You know, the actors and the singers and the unique craft of what you all do. It's the same thing for us, right? The way our chefs perform, the way, you know, even a doorman opens the door and welcomes people when they first come in. There's a lot of little touches, and again, it's all about the experiences that we provide. And of course, as you can see at the bottom, all of that happens powered by our people, right? So none of those experiences happen if that is not there. And really just to go finally just kind of in a little deeper connection. So the people side, obviously, the big focus for us is, again, there's a huge amount of competition even in the luxury world. And we push our team to create experiences that we can own, right? So what is something that Four Seasons Hotel St. Louis can do that nobody else can do, right? And I'll leave you with, you can kind of see some of the character and the craftsmanship ideas, but I'll leave you with one last story. So I started at Four Seasons in Maui right out of school. It was rough duty, horrible place. But the most interesting thing that I ever saw was we, for those that may have been there, so we are on this great beach in Hawaii. You know, it's actually the first Four Seasons resort that we had. But right next to it is a place called the Grand Wailea, which is a beautiful hotel. It has everything any kid would ever want. Water slides, you know, just this great area. And I was working the front desk right out of school, and one thing that I started to notice, we had a lot of families checking out from there and checking into our hotel, and we were the only 5-diamond resort, and I didn't really get it. And I started to ask some of these families, I said, "What, if you don't mind me asking, why are you leaving there and coming here?" And they said, "Well, you don't understand. Yes, the water slides are great, the physical components are great, but our kids are playing on the same beach." And come to find out, the Four Seasons kids were sharing, "Hey, did you get milk and cookies when you checked in?" With a personal note. No, we didn't get that. "Hey, when you checked into the bathroom, was your name spelled out in sponges?" No. "Hey, when you went down to the Kids for All Seasons program, did they take you out on this little personal tour and see the turtles and things like that?" No. And they said, "That's why we're here," right? So not sharing that from a competitive standpoint, but just, again, experiential and memorable, and just challenge your teams on how we can make that work. So.
Thank you so much. That was just really inspiring to hear about how your people create the repeat experience so effectively. It put me in mind a little bit. I don't know how many people have already been to Opera Theater this visit for performances, but from the very time you arrive at the theater, the ushers who are there, the young people who are greeting you, do it so warmly, and when you leave at the end of a performance wishing you a safe trip, did you have a nice experience? I think opera theater has done a really wonderful job in creating that human touch that distinguishes it from just a more ordinary theater experience. But David and Annie, you've heard a lot of this research, you've done research at your companies. Eventually this morning before we break, I want to get to, and what do we do? How do we convert this insight into some kind of action? But you've done research at your two companies. Is it research into the audience experience and drivers for attendance, David?
Yeah, it all started, our research practice is 6 years old, and a special shout out to Wallace for being a key partner in allowing us to do this. And it started out with this churn study that we determined that, you were with us, we determined that we were attracting 3,000 new customers every year, had been for 6 years. And 10% would return. This is the I'm going to kill myself as the general director slide in the PowerPoint presentation by the research staff, because we played all by the rule book of how we produce a good quality opera product. And that started a deep, deep exploration into what our relationship is to the customer experience. And that led us to making the decision that we had to change what we produced, how we produced it, how we delivered it to market, if we were ever going to get any repeat gains, and or if we were going to grow that 3,000 people to 4,000. And that led us to, which has been fairly well documented, starting our season with a festival that is sort of a combination of Netflixing and the opera experience through a Sundance-like urban experience. And the research from that, we found a couple of key things after this first festival, which I think would be germane to this conversation because it tacks in with the culture track. One, that all customers want unexpected and unique experiences new to them. They all have different contexts, so you can't curate their experiences. Your packaging plan is not important. What they want to see is important. And then the big kicker. So we do 017, self-curated, multiple on-ramps, and we do post-research. And nobody wants 018 to look like 017. And it runs pretty deep. They want that unique experience to continue. They want the high touch like in the Four Seasons, but that means that they want different spaces, different methods of production, different artists. So you have to kind of reinvent it every year. And that was true across all buying cohorts. So here we are. That could be a real drag, but just saying, you could use it as an opportunity. And so what the research has done is it's expanded our artistic practice. It has given us the fuel to lean further in, dig deeper, take more risks artistically. Because at the end of the day, for our audience, it's about what that is happening, that live experience, and how that is unique. And we can be nice and greet everybody, which we do. We do all those other surround things, but at that core experience. And so for us, research has empowered artistic practice, I think was the big learning. And specifically, what came out of that is what the general director wants to produce actually is not important. It's not. It's because the relationship to art and the audience is contextual to a whole wide group of people. So again, through the research, we determined that the spine of all programming has to be the artist. So we need to excite artists through an expanded artistic practice, and that's how we will excite an audience. So not the other way.
Let's pause there, and all the artists can applaud.
Yeah.
But what you're saying just completely challenges our established business model.
No kidding.
Because here you have the glorious Four Seasons Performing Arts Center in Toronto, a $20 million gift naming opportunity for in Toronto for that gorgeous, gorgeous opera house. And you're saying that the predictability of that venue, as lovely as it is, the sameness of going to it production after production, actually was inhibiting repeat attendance.
Yes. I mean, we factor in, we still produce at the Academy of Music in the festival, but what we produce and what we put in it, we're radically changing in the forthcoming years. We have a chamber music space, but everything else changes, the venue, and the venues aren't chosen by us in advance. The work is committed to and designed without venue, and the venue is sought after and matched to enhance the artistic experience.
So, as Christine said, it's not about taco trucks.
It is not. Although I love tacos and I like trucks. And
I'm going to come to your taco trucks.
And you can round out the experience, and you have to do that. I think our findings are that, it can be, the starting point is the core artistic engagement, and where that is part of that experience.
Annie, so you come out of this research DNA to a new opera company for you, Austin Opera, and you began doing research. How did you convince your board to invest in good research?
Well, it was very interesting because I came from a company that had invested so much in research, and it was so important, and also a company that was willing to make enormous changes to its business model based on that research. And then I went to Austin, where no research had really been done. So I felt like I was flying blind. So to get to know my new market, I know we needed to do research, but I was in a different scenario, and that I had no money. Or really any people. And so I thought...
They're laughing at you, not with you.
Yes, right. So I thought, okay, how do I get more manpower kind of assigned to this question and to this theory of change, which absolutely grew out of what I learned in Philadelphia. My belief that one of the fundamental problems we have to deal with as an industry is stickiness, it's retention of patrons. But I also believed coming out of Philadelphia that finding solutions to that are most likely going to be market specific, right? The right choice for Opera Philadelphia wasn't going to be the right choice necessarily for Austin Opera or anywhere else. And so I said, okay, how can I need manpower, and I need someone who knows what they're doing when it comes to research. And so fortunately, we were awarded an innovation grant to hire a director of audience experience. And I wanted to see what happened if we embedded someone completely committed to audience experience on the senior team as a peer to the head of development and the head of marketing. My experience in other organizations is people acknowledge experience is so important, but it's so easy for that to get buried under front-burning revenue issues for your head of marketing or your head of development. And I said, but what if there was someone always there at the table, a consistent voice for the audience in every discussion we had? Would that lead to better organizational decision-making? So that was the theory I wanted to test. So I was able to hire someone, but we needed research expertise. And so we turned to our friends at Four Seasons Austin, and we said, you guys, do tons of research, tons of surveys. You have all this experience, and incredible expertise in guest satisfaction. Can you help us? And they said, absolutely. And they were incredibly generous with us, provided all this in-kind benefits. They advised us on our research. They provided free secret shoppers to test our experience, to see how things were going. Our director of audience experience moved into the Four Seasons for a week, where he did everything from making beds to working behind the bar and working behind the desk and working with all the senior staff. So he was able to bring the best intelligence from that experience right to the senior table at Austin Opera, which was hugely valuable. And we just started throwing surveys out there. And we had some good people to give us advice on doing surveys. And so we started to gather information. And we learned a lot. I mean, ultimately, my theory of change was if we structurally dedicate all of these resources to audience experience, that our retention figures will get better over time. And so it's too early to know if that's happening. But in terms of what we do know, I think that we know that having a head of an audience experience at the table does lead to better organizational decision making. It's so easy to tilt an entire institutional strategy based on the strong voice of a few influential donors or folks that are in your orbit. And so in a way, it kind of democratizes our artistic planning and programming and everything we do just by having that persistent voice at the table. And we also learned that our audience very much wants to have a relationship with us. Our post-performance surveys have a response rate of like 35%. And in the open field questions, I mean, people just write and write and write. And so they want to have a relationship with us, which is fantastic. But they do want, as a few of you have pointed out, a relationship with character. So Michael Solomon, who's our director of audience research, he is a character. And our pre-show communications and post-show communications, you know, they're witty and they're funny. And they've enabled us to create kind of an institutional identity and a character in a way that's been hugely helpful, and people really responded to it.
In the first few months, and we recognize that you haven't had time to look long-term at the benefit of the investment, what's one thing, what are two things that you've changed based on your early learning?
Things that we've changed. Well, certainly, you know, I think it was amazing to see the infectious impact of having someone who's so relentlessly dedicated to welcoming everyone into a space. You know, Michael's out there, he's just running around, you know, gathering up any kind of stray audience members that he can find. And while those of us on this, you know, forward-facing staff were always very friendly, we found ourselves going out of our way in a whole new set of ways to engage folks and feel welcome. And just having the mindset, again, that we put forth at the beginning, that Austin Opera, we are responsible for someone's experience from the time they go online to buy a ticket until the time they pull into their driveway. It's not, I just don't think it's enough to say, well, we can't control traffic. Well, that's true, but what can we control to make that traffic experience better or alleviate, even if it's just a funny joke of warning and acknowledging it's going to happen?
Mm-hmm. David, as you look ahead to 2018 with this new learning, are you able to make it different? And you've now, of course, you're partnering with people, you're doing things in different spaces. Are you able to make it different enough so that these people will be satisfied that it's different?
We're gonna find out, won't we?
What are you trying to do?
So what we did, we got the research in early November from 2017, and 2018 was all contracted. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that, because we'd gotten sort of some concerns raised that 2017 we were being a little too edgy. So I sort of softened 2018, and then we got this research and it was like, oh crap, we need to like make it edgier. So we basically went to all the artists and said, hey, you know that project we contracted you for? Can we change it? So I'm gonna actually talk about Pat Brissett, who is here at Opera Theater St. Louis. And we had scheduled that to be a production of La Voix Humaine in the Perlman Theater. And we were like, that seems a little predictable. That's not a new experience. So we went to Pat and James Dara, and we asked them to rethink the La Voix as an experience. And so what we are doing is we've taken over a nightclub on South Street, TLA, and it's been reimagined as Ne Quittez Pas, and it's an immersive evening where Pat plays a cabaret performer who devolves into Elle from La Voix in this no fourth wall experience. Edward Nelson is also going to be positioned as a cabaret performer, and he's the young man that she's talking about as she devolves into this, and it just became something totally different. And we're seeing the weird Venn diagram that we got in 2017 about people picking these different things. It's mutating out to be yet different again. So the hunch is yes, but it means you kind of have to drive a truck into that sort of your theory of change, and a little bit, sorry for the detail on it, but I think it puts it into.
Any questions from this side of the table of our opera company subjects here?
I do.
Please.
I have a question, actually, for anyone in opera or for Tim also. How do you balance then, because we're seeing this right now with our own grantees, how do you balance mission and margin in all of this, especially because taking risks is incredibly expensive, because that's also the point of risk. You don't know if it's going to work out or not.
Please go ahead.
I think that one of the best ways you can ameliorate risk is to capitalize for it. We've had lots of conversations about that, which is a really hard thing to do because having excess cash lying around is not something that most of us have. But that was our practice, was we built up some working capital leading up to 2017. It's all gone. And so we're in the business of trying to recapitalize and having a dialogue with your board and funders and your community about investing in change capital in addition to the direct contributions that put something on stage. And sort of figuring that out is sort of what we've focused our efforts on.
Andy, how about you? How in a company that doesn't have the resources, or you walked in without a whole lot of capital, how are you economically making space for the experimentation you're doing?
Through a lot of in-kind help. We also, we decided to kind of organizationally go all in, and so we created a committee around audience experience as well. And so we have them going out, making observations, connecting us to people to expand what we have to offer, but primarily looking at in-kind support.
And you mentioned something a moment ago, and I want you to amplify it. Lots of board members, lots of major patrons have their rather fixed viewpoints about what will work. Do you find that the delivery of research is able to, as you say, democratize the conversation so that you can break through what might be some preconceived notions?
Yep, I think it really helps. In the beginning, the first thing we kind of sat down to do was start strategic planning in partnership with our board, and we established, our values and being a learning organization and an experimentation and the value, which I learned at Opera Philadelphia, of just getting something out there to see what people think about it, as opposed to researching what the perfect thing will be, because I guess as you found out, you do it, and then they want something completely different. Right. So just get it out there and see.
And I'll come to you in a second, Sunil. And David, you spoke about, and I want to, is we are automatically product focused. We're producers. Are you also dealing with the audience experience outside of the product?
Yes, we are. So the 5 E's, we've adopted a human-centered design practice in our work. So we are very focused on Entice, actually, we're pretty good at. Please come and sell. We're really focused on enter, exit, and extend. And what we've learned is if we can engineer an amazing enter experience, we get gains on heightened engagement in the actual product. And for us, the enter starts when your tickets arrive. And so from that engineering of the ticket, what the tickets look like and how that arrives and everything that goes into, and then the engagement starts when you sit down and all points in between. And we've figured out ways to actually set people up for a heightened engagement level in the actual product.
Sunil?
Just a comment or a compliment. I wanted to say that I'm just really, it's really good and kind of gratifying to hear about the use of logic models and theories of change in this field or any field of performing arts endeavor. I mean, everyone's eyes start to glaze over, right? But I mean, we do this all the time, and federal agencies are required to do this kind of work. But it's useful because to find that it's actually appealed to you and that you found that meaningful in any way is a big deal because it kind of validates it if it is done right, and you can actually control and calibrate what your outputs, and outcomes could be. The other is just a quick correction. I think I might have said that the arts 3 trillion. I might have said that the arts contribute about 3 trillion, 75% or 700 billion to the U.S. economy. I meant it's actually it is 700 billion. It's not. I think I might have said million. So it was haunting me in the back of my mind. What's a few hundred billion between friends? Right? Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, because of our live stream, we need to do a hard stop at 12 noon. There's so much more we could talk about what these two great companies are doing and what many of you are doing or experimenting with. But I think this gives you some research resources you should take a look at. The SPPA, the GSA out of the National Endowment for the Arts, the fabulous reports that come out of the Wallace Foundation. I fear that every Four Seasons hotel in the country is going to get a call for in-kind service, so just send an email to corporate. Oops.
We like the partnership.
And we'll continue on this path and to collect information and share it with you, because indeed that audience experience is so much an important part of this in partnership with the product. Thank you for your attention. Please thank the panelists. And there are some lunch activities, and the annual business meeting does begin promptly upstairs on the 18th floor. So the voting general director members and board members of Opera America, 18th floor. Thank you.